Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're tackling a truly foundational topic in the accounting world, the logic of ASC 606. Before we can even think about diving into the complex, multi-step processes of revenue recognition, we have to understand the ground rules. ASC 606 absolutely reshaped how we think about revenue from contracts with customers, and mastering its core principles is just essential. So, let's jump right in and lay the groundwork for everything that follows.
Here's our roadmap. We're starting with the welcome to ASC 606, then diving into the core principle of control, followed by scope and exclusions. After that, we'll build up your ASC 606 vocabulary by covering key terms for the contract and finally terms related to assets and liabilities.
Section 2. The Core Principle, a unified framework for revenue recognition.
Before ASC 606, let's be honest, revenue recognition was kind of fragmented. We relied on this whole patchwork of industry-specific rules. We were looking at when cash was received, when an invoice was sent out, or when risks and rewards transferred. It was a lot. ASC 606 replaced all of that with one single principles-based framework that applies across the board. Today, the timing of every single revenue decision is driven entirely by one thing, and that is the transfer of control to the customer.
So, what does control actually mean in this context? Let's break down this core definition. Control is the customer's ability to direct the use of and obtain substantially all remaining benefits from a good or service. Basically, it means the customer is now fully in the driver's seat. They dictate what happens to that asset, and they reap the rewards of it. And I literally cannot stress this enough. Getting this concept of control wrong will cascade into errors all the way down the line. It's the fundamental trigger for your revenue recognition.
Section 3. Scope and Exclusions. Knowing when not to use ASC 606.
Before you even apply this standard, you have to be absolutely sure you actually have a customer, meaning a party contracting to obtain the outputs of your ordinary activities. If that criteria isn't met, or if you hit a specific exclusion, you're gonna have to look elsewhere. For instance, lease contracts, those fall under ASC 842. Insurance contracts go to ASC 944. Financial instruments have their own suite of standards, like ASC 310, 320, 470, or 815. Financial guarantees fall under ASC 460, and certain non-monetary exchanges within the same industry go to ASC 845. But you might be wondering what happens if you have a mixed contract, say a bundled lease and a service component. Well, in that scenario, you carve it out. The lease portion goes straight to ASC 842, and only the service component stays under ASC 606.
Section 4. Key terms. The contract. Building your ASC 606 vocabulary.
To really make this concrete, let's think about a super common scenario, selling a mobile phone that's bundled with a monthly data plan. First up in our vocabulary toolkit is the contract itself. Under ASC 606, a contract is an agreement between two or more parties that creates enforceable rights and obligations. And here's the kicker. It doesn't actually require a formal signed piece of paper. It can be written, sure, but it can also be oral or even implied by customary business practices, just as long as it's enforceable.
Next up is performance obligation. This is simply a promise to transfer a distinct good or service to the customer. Every single distinct promise is considered a separate performance obligation. So, going back to our telecom scenario, the physical mobile phone you hand over, that's one distinct promise. The ongoing monthly data plan, that's an entirely separate promise. Therefore, you've got two separate performance obligations sitting inside that one single contract.
Then we have the transaction price. This is defined as the amount of consideration the entity expects to receive in exchange for those goods or services. I really want to highlight the word expects here. This is the amount you actually anticipate getting. It's a super common pitfall to just assume this is the face value printed on an invoice. It isn't. It's what you realistically expect to collect in exchange for fulfilling your promises. And that leads us directly to the standalone selling price, or SSP. This is the price at which your entity would sell a distinct good or service separately, entirely on its own. Why is this so crucial? Because the SSP acts as your critical baseline for allocating that total transaction price we just talked about. If you sell a bundled phone and data plan for a flat, say, $1,000, you use the standalone selling price of the phone and the standalone selling price of the data plan to figure out exactly how much of that $1,000 belongs to each specific performance obligation.
Section 5. Key terms, assets and liabilities. Understanding rights and obligations.
Now, it's not just about the income statement. We also have to properly classify our assets on the balance sheet. Let's compare a contract asset right alongside accounts receivable. A contract asset, which you might sometimes hear called unbilled revenue, is a conditional right to consideration. It depends on you completing further performance. Accounts receivable, on the other hand, is an unconditional right. You are literally just waiting on the passage of time for that payment. Mixing these two up seriously distorts your balance sheet, because a contract asset carries performance risk, while accounts receivable only carries credit risk. They are fundamentally different.
Next, we have the contract liability. You probably know this better by its common, everyday name, deferred revenue. This is the entity's obligation to transfer goods or services for which consideration has already been received. It's a very straightforward cause and effect concept. If a customer pays you upfront in cash before you've actually delivered the service or the product, well, you owe them. You hold a liability on your books until you transfer control of that good or service.
And finally, we have the remaining performance obligation, or RPO. This represents the transaction price that's been allocated to goods or services that have not yet been delivered to the customer. Basically, it's what's left to do in the contract. And there's a huge regulatory consequence attached to this for certain companies. Public entities are specifically required to disclose this RPO amount, as well as the expected timing of when they will actually fulfill it.
Okay, so we've covered the core principle of control. We've mapped out the scope, and we've armed ourselves with the critical vocabulary of ASC 606. But all of this hinges on one foundational event. Before you can identify performance obligations, or allocate prices, or frankly, recognize a single dollar of revenue, you have to answer one critical question. How do we know if we actually have a valid contract in the first place? Think about that, because that is exactly where we're heading next in Step 1, Identify the Contract. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.